Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection. We will begin with our prayer of surrender and then today's devotion. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. All right, today we're going to be talking about dealing with stress, which is always a good thing to do, to know how to do at this time of the year. Our affirmation is, I understand the vital importance of a daily spiritual practice. I know in times of stress, this is what I can fall back onto. This is what I can fall back on to remain in my peace. All right, so then the text says, when you find yourself in a stressful moment, what do you do? This is when it's important to have a plan. First, don't be afraid to pause before you react. Rarely do we come across a situation or a person who simply must have an immediate response. Now, you may get nervous or panic and think you have to fill in that dead space. Does anybody else have that issue? I've had to fight that issue my whole life of when things get too silent, I want to jump in and fill it up with words and conversation. But sometimes you just need to sit there and wait. And every single moment of silence does not need to be filled up with words. Okay, so when a stressful situation comes your way, if possible, excuse yourself and find somewhere to be alone for a few minutes, even if it's in the bathroom. There's hardly any situation where you can't excuse yourself to go to the restroom. Once alone, bring yourself back to your center. It is important to note that in order to bring yourself back to center, you have to know where that is, okay? So if you've never been to a place, you don't know how to get back there. So that's why our spiritual daily practice is important, to feel what it feels like to be centered so that we can get ourselves back there when we fall out of it. If you don't know what calm feels like in the first place, it's difficult to get back there. Regroup, zoom out, and see the situation from a wider angle. Is this really an argument worth having? Are you at a family gathering to celebrate something? If so, remember not to give your time and energy to anything that doesn't add to the main purpose of why you are there. Having a mindful plan in place before a stressful moment strikes can help make your life run much more smoothly. All right, so I am all for that, having plans in place, and that is the reason we have our regular spiritual practice. It's not for those times when things are going great. It's for those times when stressful moments hit, and then we know we have something to fall back on. All right, let's pray our prayer. God of peace, help me to plan ahead for stressful times so I will not be caught off guard. Help me learn how to protect my peace. Amen. All right, everybody, let's take a deep breath in and say our connection affirmation together. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. Amen. So obviously next week is Christmas, and because of the way it falls this year, which interestingly we'll be talking quite a bit today about calendars and how different days fall on different dates every year. But this year, both Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve fall on Tuesdays. So today will be the last connection of 2024. We won't meet next Tuesday or the Tuesday after that. And because this is the last connection of the year, I'm going to kind of skip over Christmas. We will be together on Sunday. I will see everybody here on this Sunday, and we'll talk about Christmas then. But today, we're going to skip We're going to skip straight to the new, talking about and thinking about the new year. And y'all are in for it because I have been down a YouTube rabbit hole. So, woo, here we go. My dad has a little phrase that he says, usually after some event or party has ended and we're all back home, he'll say, "And a good time was had by all." Or if you've gone somewhere and he hasn't gone, when you come back, he'll say, "Was a good time had by all." So that's my title today, "And a good time was had by all." Now, I'm going to ask you to bear with me because in the beginning especially, I'm going to build a bit of a clock. Do you know what I mean when I say that? It means my teaching today has several pieces that fit together like the gears of a clock. But in order to get to the point, I have to build the clock first. In other words, I'm going to be giving you some information that you probably won't see the point of me sharing with you until I fit it together at the end. But we will get there, I promise. So here we go. The word time is in my title, and we're going to be spending a good deal of time talking about time today and how we can have a better time in the new year. An important thing to do at this time every year is to take a look back and do a little mini life review of the previous year. And if while doing this you find that you have been taking the same path over and over again, you've been doing the same things, you've been responding or reacting in the same way over and over, and you'd like to change that, then there's a couple of things you've got to do. Number one, you've got to make some space for something new. If your life is all in your head and your heart and your mind are already all full of things, then there's no space for anything new to happen, to come in. So first of all, you got to make some space. Number two, you've got to believe that whatever that something new is will come to you. You've got to have the faith that it will. I'm going to read an excerpt now from a volume of several books that I have called Lyrics. And it's basically a series of interviews with Paul McCartney of the Beatles, telling and talking about the backstories of all the wonderful songs he's written over the years. He says, "It's a mystery how all this happened. People stop me in the street and they can get very emotional. They say, 'Your music has changed my life.' And I know what they mean, that the Beatles brought something very important to their lives. But it's still a mystery, and I don't mind ending up being a mystery. With regard to this all-pervading mystery, there's one incident I'll always remember. We were driving north in a van, just the four of us Beatles and one roadie. It was freezing cold during a big blizzard, and we couldn't even see our hands in front of our faces. All we could do was basically follow the tail lights of the car in front of us. At one point, the snow was so bad, our van spun out of control and slipped sideways down an embankment. We looked up at the road, shaken but okay, and we thought, how are we going to get back up there? It was a mystery. But one of us, I can't remember who, said, 'Something will happen.' Some people might find this outlook, 'something will happen,' simple or banal. But I think it's a great philosophy. Something will happen is the idea that no matter how desperate you are, no matter how bad everything seems, something will happen. I find that idea helpful, and I think it's a philosophy worth holding on to." So that's the end of his quote. All right, so we can apply that to our own personal lives. A lot of us may feel like we have spun out of control and slipped sideways down an embankment. We may feel like we're in the middle of a blizzard so strong that we can't see our hands in front of our face. We have no idea what's coming next or how we're going to get to where we want to be from where we are right now. So it is important to have as our attitude this philosophy that Sir Paul McCartney just gave us. Something will happen. That's that number 2 part. You've got to have the faith that something will happen. We will find a way forward. But that clear path that is the road to our future might be a mystery for a bit. And that's okay, because it's good to have a little time while you're living in the mystery to revisit and analyze the past so we don't get stuck on the same path over and over again. At the beginning of a new year, there are always decisions to be made. But they don't all have to be made on or by January 1st. Now, here's where we're going to start talking about time. Robert Midori has this to say about it. Time is simply a man-made invention to count the period of and between events. It does not exist in nature. Since early beginnings, man has tried to give meaning to events to somehow define the past, the present, and the future. Humans are always trying to improve their knowledge of the concept of time, but time does not exist in the known universe as a constant, only in the minds of humans. End quote. All right, so knowing that, we now see that all this pressure to get things done by January 1st or any date by any arbitrary date we want to set to make all these decisions is self-imposed. Time, as we have come to define it, is not something that is constant in nature. So we can afford to slow down and not be in such a hurry with things. I was listening to Andrew Martin recently, and he was talking about this too. And he had some interesting insights about time, especially this period of time that we're about to be in, the new year. And he says this: our calendar system marks January as the beginning of the year. But I have felt for quite some time that January is a month out of time, as it were, not necessarily the time for taking big actions, because energetically, it's just not supported. Energetically, in the month of January, we are not yet ready to move forward, but are still in this phase of getting ready to move into the new thread or the experience of the new year. All right, so you know how it really, and as we'll get into this later when we talk more about calendars and how they have changed, does anybody else find it funny? We just really don't question it because that's the way it's been all of our lives. But why would they put the new year smack dab in the middle of winter? The most drab, it's like it's dull, it's dark, it's cold. Why would we want to start new things? I saw this meme the other day that I thought was funny. It said, most other mammals in nature hibernate. They go into a cave somewhere and sleep through the winter, but we still keep trudging on like it's, summertime. So anyway, he says we have to remember that linear time, what we measure by a clock or a calendar, is basically an illusion. Certainly, there are definite cycles and rhythms that exist, but we have taken them and defined them sometimes in a limiting way. We have chopped up time into increments that are not necessarily relevant to the natural rhythms and cycles of our lives. Using a calendar or a clock is very useful for keeping up with the events and duties of life, but only from the perspective of the matrix. Once you have liberated yourself from living within the confines of the matrix, the false construct of linear time, you begin to see that what you do and where you go, how you create and when you decide to be active and when you decide to be dormant, really has nothing to do with the clock or the calendar. The external world expects you to make resolutions during the month of January, and there's a lot of pressure for us to set the agenda for the entire coming year in those 31 days in order to make it the best year ever. And you can do that if you want, but energetically, the year doesn't actually get going until the lunar new year begins, which happens in February. And I'm going to stop right here and interject. Okay, that's debatable. Different calendars, as we'll talk about in a little bit, have the lunar year beginning in different months. Some say February, some say March, some say April. It all depends on who was in charge at the time that calendar got created. But you can just feel that there's a different energy at some times of the year than others. And in my personal opinion, which I happen to agree with Andrew about, in the dead middle of winter, what was that song we used to sing, Benny? In the bleak midwinter. in the bleak midwinter is not the time to be making a lot of decisions and starting a lot of new things. That even nature is trying to tell us that is a time to rest. All right, back to Andrew. I always view January as a time of transition, a little breather, a time to allow yourself to perceive what is before you. I look at it as an odd number of instability and change, moving to an even number, which has much more solid and stable energy, moving from month 1 to month 2. The month of January is not a time for total inaction, though it might look like that on the external level, but a time to make sure you are aligned with your highest self. So we'll talk a little bit later about the importance of alignment as it relates to the calendar. So just sit, he says, just be curious. Allow your mind to wander. One of the beautiful things about allowing yourself some time to be curious before making a big decision is that it gives you time to perceive the resonance or non-resonance of your emotional field. So what he means by that is before making a decision one way or the other, you should allow yourself some time to consider your options, not just mentally or logically think them through, but see how you feel when you imagine yourself in certain scenarios. For example, sit there and think, if I do this thing, option A, how does that make me feel? Versus if I imagine myself doing something else, option B, how does that make me feel? So we've talked before about how our emotions are signals that we should pay attention to. And this is one of the ways we can use our emotions as our allies to help us, as our friends. All right, back to Andrew. As you allow yourself to consciously and mindfully explore, your emotions will tell you what you resonate with and what you don't. So let's think of January as our exploratory campaign. So, politicians often will do this before they decide to run for an office. They'll have what they call an exploratory campaign where they just kind of go out and see how it feels before they make the commitment to run for an office. All right, action doesn't only mean going out and actually doing something. Inner work is also an action. Patience is also an action. Being still and silent, waiting for a clear sign that it's time to move in the external is also an action. It's a lot like warming up your car on a cold day. It's not in drive yet, but it's not totally in an inactive state either. All right, so that's another way to think about what we're going to do in January. So let's just relax and let go of the pressure to have the whole year ahead of us planned and figured out. If you're still feeling like you're in that blizzard, like Paul McCartney and the rest of the Beatles were, just adopt his philosophy. Something will happen. All right, things will become clear. Your own emotions will begin to guide you to what's going to be best for you. But you've got to practice a little patience. Let me read to you now a beautifully written description of January. And I think I've read this to you before several years ago, but it's from a book that I love called The Dance of Time. I love the way this is worded. It says, January marks the end of the revels that from the most ancient of days have celebrated the seeming death and resurrection of the sun at the winter solstice on December 21st. December's crowded joys are over. The presents have been opened, the punch drunk, carols have been silenced by winter's hush. Time loses its sacred quality and becomes again mere time. The child has been born, referring to a brand new year, and it remains to be seen what the world will do with him. Okay, remember that it's kind of old-fashioned, but they used to represent the new year as the baby. The little baby boy was a new year. So it says it remains to be seen. The baby has now been born, and it remains to be seen what we're going to do with it, this new year that's in front of us. January is named after Janus, the Roman god of portals and doorways, endings and beginnings. He sported two heads, okay? One face was on the front and one was on the back. One face looked back into the past and the other forward into the future. Janus occupied the eternal present and served as not only the guardian of time, but as the protector of the here and now. His image was commonly placed above doorways, with one face gazing into the house and the other out into the world. As the god of time, Janus presided over all moments of transition: dawn, noon, dusk, and midnight. The Romans also called him with deep affection Pater Matuninus, the father of the morning, because Janus was believed to roll back the night and wake up the sun. In keeping with his nature, Janus also brought on the shades of night. The month named after him is considered the gateway of the year. January is a month of dualities and contradictions. Although it is thought of as the opening of gloomy winter after the lights and joys of the holidays, it is also one of the most beautiful months of the year. Nature reveals herself without artifice. Sunlight falls on bare branch, on stone or earth, revealing the hidden contours of nature, the simple skeleton of creation. The song of the birds is more thrilling than at any other time of year because it is more rare. Each creature glimpsed along a woodland walk seems like a surviving gift. January bears a vast silence that teaches us to wait for a moment between what came before and what will follow after. Beautiful. I love that. And so, speaking of moments between what came before and what will follow after, we're going to switch gears a little now, but we're going to follow this theme of a time outside of time, as it were, timelessness. So did you know that in our past, there were actually very different ways of keeping time and of counting days, where there were actually designated days on the calendar that were called year days, and they didn't belong to any specific month, and they weren't labeled as a specific day of the week. This is how some ancient cultures reconcile the differences between the lunar year and the solar year. Every so often, they found they needed to slip in an extra day, but they wouldn't really name it or count it on their calendar, which is much different than it is now, which we're about to get into, so that the year would not get out of sequence. So, for instance, it would be Saturday, June the 20th, and it wasn't necessarily in June. I'm just using that. In fact, the months were not even the same names then as they are now. But say Saturday was June the 20th. Well, then they would live through their day Saturday. Then the next day, they would just have one of these days that they didn't really count. And then the next day after that would be Sunday, January 21st, and they just go on. Every once in a while, they just take a break and have a day that was out of time. So, and on that, they would not work. They would kind of have a special meal. It was like a little respite. So can you imagine if someone suggested doing something like that today in 2024? People would lose their minds because we've become slaves to time, or rather to the construct we have created that is time, in the specific way that we count it now by our clocks and calendars. So this man-made construct where we are so attached to certain days, and that we have allowed that and these days that we honor to separate us from each other, as well as from the natural cycles of Mother Earth. And that's not a good recipe for a good time being had by all, is it? Wouldn't it be great if we could just think outside the box a little and stick in an extra day or two when we just have a party? It sounds good to me. So here's where I'm going to start to build the clock by giving you some very specific information, and it is about our calendar system, but I promise it's going to be interesting. So this is from a piece called The 13-Month Tartarian Calendar, and I saw this on a YouTube channel called Tales of the Old World. It says, we're told that our modern civilization is the absolute pinnacle of technology. But if that were the case, why is our calendar so wonky? Why do some months have 31 days instead of 30? Why do we have to add an extra day every 4 years? Especially when many ancient calendars were so precise, having to be adjusted very rarely. They could just cycle on and on for thousands of years. But instead, the people now in power have literally chosen to use a less advanced calendar system. Why would they do this? Okay, now conspiracy theorists will say because they wanted to throw us off from our natural rhythm. Maybe they were just dumb. I don't know. But that's what the result has been. It says an odd thing about these ancient calendars is that most of them contained 13 months rather than 12. Who knew that? I didn't know that before I read this. The concept of a 13-month calendar is a fascinating subject that intertwines with the history of timekeeping, astronomy, and cultural practices across various civilizations. The idea is often associated with the lunar cycle, a lunar cycle or a month. Now, time out. Do you know why we call it a month? It was originally called a month, because a lunar cycle is the time it takes the moon to go through all of its phases, new moon to new moon. And it's approximately 29.5 days long. Therefore, a lunar year, which consists of 12 lunar months, only contains 354 days. This is shorter than the solar year, and a solar year obviously is the time it takes for the Earth to make one orbit around the sun, is approximately 365.24 days. So, in order to reconcile this discrepancy, some ancient calendars contained a 13th month so that the solar and the lunar years would align with each other. One of the most notable of these calendars was actually created in the early 20th century and by an entity known as the International Fixed Calendar League. This calendar divided the year into 13 months of 28 days each, with one or two extra added to align it with the solar year. Now, these are some of the benefits of if we did it this way. Each month had exactly 4 weeks, which its supporters argued would simplify financial calculations and record keeping. Although this particular version was created in the early 1900s, and we'll get more into why that was the case later on, it is deeply rooted in ancient wisdom and based on the observation of the cosmos. Okay, so also it was noted in another part of this video that, think about it, when we're thinking about nature, women, when they have their cycles, it's every 28 days. In the I don't know exactly what they call it, but there's something about the tides of the ocean. Something happens to them every 28 days. It's not 30 days sometimes and 31 days and 29 days. It's very steady. And so that's what this calendar would put us in sync with. This calendar is deeply connected to the natural world and the cycles of growth and decay. A 13-month calendar is mentioned in the Finnish, and that's not as in the end, it's Finnish as in Finland, book of folklore called the Kalevala. In this text, it is not only a measure of time, but also a symbol of deeper cosmological beliefs and cultural narratives. The Kalevala speaks of a world where time is cyclical, okay, so we talk about that a lot, and integrally entwined with both the natural and spiritual realms. Each month in this calendar represents a different aspect of life or an element of Finnish folklore, reflecting that society's connection to their environment and the passage reflecting that society's connection to their environment and the passage of time. Moreover, the number 13 itself holds significant symbolic meaning in many cultures, often associated with transformation and renewal. In the context of a 13-month calendar, it represents balance and the completion of a cycle. One of the appeals of a 13-month calendar is its symmetry and consistency, with each month having exactly 4 weeks, with each month beginning on the same day of the week. The exploration of these alternative calendars opens a window into the ways humans have sought to harmonize their lives with the rhythm of the cosmos. Although it has not been widely adopted in modern times, it serves as a reminder of the diverse ways humanity seeks to understand and measure the passage of time. We are told our modern calendar originated with the Romans, which was derived from the Greeks, who incidentally also added a 13th month every few years to keep the months aligned with the seasons. But eventually, okay, now here's where it comes in, some man with a huge ego, Julius Caesar, reformed this because he wanted to do it his way into the Julian calendar, which was reformed again in the 1500s into the Gregorian calendar by Pope Gregory. We notice that this is men doing this, right? Which is what we use today. And somewhere along the line, the 13th month was dropped, causing things to be thrown off so far from the original calendars that possibly thousands of years now have been misrecorded. The more historians look into this, the more there seems to be to question about our modern narrative and the timeline of ancient history, which is the result of us long ago discarding a calendar system that worked in perfect synchronicity with nature. Somewhere along the way, we regressed and set aside the tradition of tracking time by the things we saw in the night sky. Another negative result of this change was how it affected agriculture. Under the old system, okay, remember we talked about this, the new year coincided with the spring or vernal equinox, which is roughly our months of either March or April. And there was a specific designated day on which the agricultural season began in order to maximize the harvest. They closely tracked all the patterns, cycles, and movements of the stars and planets because they believed this is how the gods, the Elohim, communicated with man. Therefore, understanding and interpreting celestial phenomena was seen as a way to align human action with divine will. This is also why cities were built and laid out in alignment with the constellations. Okay. I want to stop right here and interject a thought, which I'll continue to do as we go on. But you see how the pattern is starting here, where man started getting off track and when they stopped actively trying to align themselves with divinity, with a higher power, with what they considered divinity, whatever it was they called it. They knew there was a God or a set of gods somewhere, and they knew that in order for them to be successful, they had to align their earthly lives with that. And when we stopped doing that is when we started veering this way. As some people say, it's when we hung a left. So when we stopped doing that, we got out of sync. And some people realized this not so very long ago. The powers that be almost decided to return to the 13-month calendar system immediately following World War I. Now, that makes sense, doesn't it? The whole entire world had just been at war. And so people started reflecting, why are we fighting each other? Why was the whole entire world at war? Maybe we need to reflect and think about the way we're doing things. So the League of Nations, which was, the precursor to the United Nations, it was created in the wake of what was then known as the Great War in order to prevent that kind of war from ever happening again. And this body seriously considered going back to the 13-month calendar. Here's an excerpt from an article that was found in the Washington Post. In the aftermath of World War I, delegates from dozens of countries met at the League of Nations conference in Geneva, hoping to create a universal calendar that would unite the world. So you see, we've been given opportunity after opportunity to come together with each other, but something always seems to prevent us from fully realizing unity consciousness. Anybody want to guess what the biggest obstacle to that was back in 1923? Let's keep reading and see. You're probably not going to be surprised. The League quickly fixed on an international fixed calendar that was comprised of 13 months of 28 days each. The benefit of the new calendar was uniformity. Every month would begin on a Sunday and end on a Saturday. So you would never have to ask, for example, what day of the week the 26th was. It would always be a Thursday. A one-day world holiday between the last Saturday of the year and January the 1st would bring the total number of days to 365. A secular worldwide holiday must have seemed appealing in the early days of this first diplomatic body whose mission and purpose it was to end wars forever. But not everyone was sold on the idea that a new calendar could unite the world. All right, I'm going to stop again and interject here that this day, this secular worldwide holiday, would have served the purpose of transcending all of our individual holy days from all the different religions. So it wouldn't matter what religion you followed and what holy days you observed. This one day of the year, the entire world would celebrate together and transcend their individual religions. But Jewish people especially had a major concern. The Jewish day of rest, called the Sabbath, falls on every seventh day. But with the addition of this blank day inserted at the end of every December, the Jewish 7-day cycle, which they believed to be dictated by God, would no longer align with the days of the week. The Sabbath, a day on which work is prohibited for Jews, would fall on a different day of the week each year and not necessarily be on a weekend. The thought of even the possibility of the Sabbath falling on a Tuesday or a Wednesday had the Jewish world up in arms. At the League of Nations conference in 1931, now this started being talked about in 1923, and it's taken them all the way to 1931, and they're still arguing about this because religion. Okay, I'm just going to leave that right there. At the League of Nations conference in 1931, many delegates thought the adoption of the new standardized system was a done deal. All that was left was to formally vote it in. But as the conference wore on, religion became a sticking point for others as well. Seventh-day Adventists also raised concerns about the Sabbath. Various delegates debated which fixed date should be assigned to Easter. They couldn't decide when they wanted Easter to be. Finland wanted it in late spring. Norway preferred April 20th to avoid conflicts with the cod fishing season. And Ireland flat out refused to participate without a unanimous agreement from the Catholic ecclesiastic authorities. Proponents of the plan continued to push for its acceptance at subsequent conferences, but the momentum for its passage died out in the early 1930s. An attempt to create something that would work for and benefit everyone turned out to please almost no one. Wow. So, yep, you guessed it. Religion and people's blind adherence to rules and rituals and their specific holy days that were actually all man-made and not in accordance with nature is what kept the entire world from uniting and returning to a system that would have been more in harmony with our natural world and its seasons. What did Jesus say about the Sabbath? Mark 2:27, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Okay, remember? Some of his disciples were doing something that the Jewish people said you couldn't do on the Sabbath, and he said, look, the Sabbath was created so man could rest. It wasn't meant for us to have to become its slave. It's for us. It says it was a day of rest created to help people, not to become a burden or an obstacle to our unity with each other. So, no, having the Sabbath fall on a particular day was more important to them than taking advantage of an opportunity to have a great reset for everybody, as it were, that might have benefited the entire world. They could not let go of their tradition, of what Mama and them had said, okay? And so the chance to come together with each other as well as with Mother Nature itself was squandered, and the separation between us, especially religious separation, continued. So I'm not going to belabor that point here. I think you get it. In order for a good time to be had by all, we might each have to let go of some of our sacred cows in the form of old thinking and staying stuck in man-made modes of measuring things that are no longer what's best for everyone. To end today, I'm going to read one more piece from the video about the importance of keeping an open mind and not being afraid of adopting new ways of looking at things, which will in turn change the way we experience things. And although what I talked about today was specifically about calendars and time, I want you to expand it to include any area of your life that you think you need to take a fresh look at as we begin a new year. It says the 13-month calendar can be seen as a way to challenge the conventional 12-month system, offering a different perspective on how we measure and experience time. It invites us to consider the cultural constructs that underpin our daily lives and to explore the potential benefits of alternative time-keeping systems, or like I said, explore alternative ways of doing a lot of things. These calendars remind us that time is not a universal constant, but a human creation, subject to reinterpretation and reinvention. Okay, it's just like Jesus said, you don't have to keep doing this. Man made the Sabbath in the first place. We can change it if we want to. Contemplating a 13-month calendar is not just an academic exercise. It is a profound reflection on the nature of time itself and our relationship with it. Let's consider some philosophical and metaphysical dimensions of this topic. Time has been the subject of philosophical inquiry since ancient times. Philosophers have long pondered the nature of time, questioning its reality and how it relates to our existence. When we consider something as drastic as changing our calendar, we are reminded that our standard measures of time are merely constructs, yet they shape our perception of reality. By considering alternative systems, we open ourselves to the idea that time can indeed be experienced and understood differently. And I'm going to add, just as lots of things can be experienced and understood differently when we open our minds. The 13-month calendar, with its alignment to the lunar cycles, invites us to live in greater harmony with Earth's natural rhythms. In today's fast-paced world, where the Gregorian calendar dominates, we often find ourselves disconnected from these cycles and therefore from each other. But it is possible to reconnect with the ebb and flow of nature and perhaps find a more balanced way of living. The 13-month calendar is more than just an alternative way to organize dates. It is a gateway to exploring deeper questions about the nature of time itself, our place in the cosmos, and how we choose to mark and celebrate the journey of our life. It challenges us to rethink our conventional frameworks and to consider their broader implications. This exploration could lead to a cultural shift where time is not seen as a mere commodity, but as a sacred dimension that forms our relationship with the world around us. By embracing alternative perspectives in time as well as religion, anything in our lives, we can enrich the experience of our existence. So, let's remember that as we come into a new year. Somehow I think 2025 is going to be the year of the alternative path in lots of different areas. I think we're going to begin to discover the value of alternative ways of thinking in politics, in medicine, in religion, and lots of things. There's the very ground beneath our feet is shifting right now, and the best thing we can do is just flow with it, and not go along with what's in the mainstream if it's not resonating in your heart and in your soul, because that is where you need to get in alignment with. Not in all of these man-made things that you hear are the right way to do things, but in your heart and soul when you get alone with your source, what you feel is right. Absolutely. So I am excited about that, and I hope you are too. Amen? Amen. And early Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. But like I said, I will see you on Sunday. Let's stand together and sing our ending song.
Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen.
Happy holidays. I love you all. We will see you back in the new year.